Hello everyone again, this is Chess Teacher Tui, and I'm bringing another tactical puzzle with you today. So this is my second video, and I decided I would do something a little different this time. And what I decided to do a little different was, rather than having a puzzle that I've solved, I thought I would set up a puzzle from that same Russian tactic book that I was telling you about earlier for young students, and rather than solve it and then show it to you, I thought I would solve it with you live, and then we can hopefully together try to work on our tactical thinking. Now, this may not be the best puzzle for this, just because, honestly, just looking at it now with you, setting it up, I honestly solved it really, really quickly. So I'm not going to be going through a very long think and letting you inside my mind, but I can still share my observations and what went through my head. So, when evaluating a position, one of the first things we do is just to look at the material on the board. So, one of the things that we can see is that black is slightly materially up, white is up the exchange, but we see that for white's 2 pawns, black has 6 pawns. So, that's a 4 pawn advantage. But at the same time, because white is up the exchange, that materially you could argue that it definitely favors black. But that's not really the issue. The issue is the quality of the pieces and the positioning of the pieces. So, for example, even though white's up the exchange, the bishop that black has is just really, really bad. I mean, looking at the light squares and where black's pawns are, the bishop is not in a particularly good place to participate in either the attack or the defense against the white king. And so that makes it pretty darn bad. But the most important thing in evaluating a position is king safety. And while white has pieces that are both defending its own king as well as being aimed at the enemy king, black's pieces are largely out of play. But one of the main things I'd like to get across when we look at this position, look to solve it, is to think about international master Jeremy Silman's rules of recognition. When you're playing chess, we don't always have time for a long think to look for a tactic. So one of the things that's very, very good is to practice looking for what kind of features of the position might make us think that a tactic could be in the works. So, for example, one of those is a weakened or stalemated king, a weakened opened or stalemated king. And as we can see from this position, because of the rook on g3 and the king where it is on h8, the king is frozen. The king is in a stalemated position. So any successful check, so for example, not rook to g8, where the rook over here on c8 could capture it, but if, for example, the f pawn was not here and the queen could play queen to f6 check, that would be mate. So that's immediately how we know we should be looking for a tactic and maybe going in for a longer think. So another thing we should be thinking about is perhaps candidate moves. What are some different moves that we could be looking at? One of the first candidate moves I looked at as I saw this position was queen to g5, because queen to g5, of course, would then threaten mate on h7. Now, it's important that when we're trying to calculate a longer position that we don't actually move the pieces. It's important that we learn to calculate without moving the pieces so that we can work on our board vision and our imagination. But my first candidate move, queen to g5, I quickly discovered does not do for me what I wanted to do, because every single move has a plus and a minus. By moving the queen to g5, I also remove the defense of this e5 pawn, which would then allow the queen to capture on e5 immediately and also defend the g7 square and the f6 square, which is what that move wanted to attack. So I can already say that even though that move might still be strong, it might still be winning for white, I'm not sure, I have to give myself permission to look for a better one. And so the next move that I looked at was much better, and I quickly saw was irrefutable because it created a number of different winning opportunities for white. So if you haven't seen that move yet, I invite you to pause the video and to see if you can find the killer move, as Mato would say, and then we'll go through it. So feel free to pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you've already solved it. So the key to this position is that white can create more threats than black can respond to in the right amount of time. The other interesting thing, as I noticed, as I said, these pieces for white, they're all participating in both the white king's defense as well as the attack against the black king. This rook on the h file is the critical piece for this tactic. The answer is actually queen to h6. Queen to h6, not only does it threaten mate on g7, which black can try to respond to that in a number of ways. It can try to respond with either rook to h8, or can try to respond with queen takes on e5. Now, I already know what to do if he responds with rook to h8 and queen takes e5. So I've already calculated this, and it's important for you to calculate this without moving the pieces, but for the purposes of demonstration, I'll show you the refutation. So if queen to h6, and then black seeking to stop the mate plays rook to g8, then basically the problem for black is that white now has this check on f6, which then forces the rook down and white mates. So we know that that defense is not adequate. So the other question, though, is what about queen takes e5? And here is where the real fun comes in. Because for every move, there's a plus and a minus, right? Now, for example, we know that if the king could move, because the king can't legally move off this file in this position, but if the king could legally move in this position, if this pawn were not here, it would be checkmate along the files. So this is the key. So after queen takes, let me make sure this engine is off. I haven't been looking at it, but this way it won't try to move for us. What we see is when the queen captures the pawn, right, we see that white has a whole different move available. Now the queen is no longer pressuring the g2 square, and that becomes key, because while this is now defended, queen doesn't have either this square or this square free, he does have the ability to remove the defense of the h7 pawn. And here is hopefully where the opponent would resign, but if not, king takes queen, which is forced, and king to g2, checkmate. This is a pretty fun puzzle, but the fun thing about it is the fact that, even though black has some defense with this mate, you can see that the key is that you're able to create multiple threats and to be mindful of the different consequences of these moves. So this has been Chess Teacher Tui. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Next time, hopefully, when I do a tactic that I solve with you, it won't be one that's quite so easy. Maybe it'll take us more than one video, or can help us to think more concretely about lines. But in the meantime, to steal from Mato, I wish you good luck with your chess, and bye for now.